You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch our podcast wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And today's show is brought to you by SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. And one last reminder that here on the Locked On Podcast Network, it is your team every day. That's right. We bring you episodes 5 days a week. Not always consistent with the time of which these podcasts come out, but if you followed me long enough, you know that most of the time, barring any electrical problems or technical problems, we are going to be giving you that episode on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and a Friday. And though tonight is a later podcast, I think it is very much a blessing that I didn't do a podcast before the game tonight. I had a podcast lined up to talk about the Michael Lorenzen deal, and we'll save that for the second segment here. But I was gifted. We talk about this in the sports media industry a lot, of you are gifted shows like this at times. Sometimes it can be slow. I've done this podcast in the off season, and there are days in which you just don't have much to talk about. And tonight, if the Royals would have lost 5-2 to the White Sox, we would have had stuff to talk about, but it would have been very depressing to go over. And I think everybody knows that. Everybody understands the reality of what a loss tonight would have done to, I think, the perception of this team. And I don't think that the Royals would have overreacted. I don't think they would have taken a loss in game one to the White Sox and thought, well, our season's over, because they still would have had a playoff spot. They would have been tied with Boston, but now they hold that one-game lead because they have a superstar in Kansas City. And as I flashed up on the screen before we started, Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't really need a long paragraph to describe the player he is. Sometimes you just say his name. Bobby is now a word that just trends over social media. When you're watching baseball, if you're a baseball fan, he captivates an audience. And I thought it was so telling that in that eighth inning, which, by the way, that doesn't even happen, doesn't come close. If Renfroe doesn't battle in his at-bat, if MJ Melendez doesn't get a hold of one, if Adam Frazier doesn't come back from being down 0-2 and getting hit by a pitch on a 10-pitch AB, if Michael Massey doesn't work back from being down in the count, none of that comes to fruition if they don't do their job. But I thought it was so telling that once Bobby Witt Jr. got to the plate, you just knew it was going to happen. I mean, if you thought that at-bat was going to go any other way, I don't know what to tell you. A bad White Sox bullpen that was already unraveling in the inning, and they had faced so many hitters, they had to face Bobby Witt Jr. They couldn't intentionally walk him. It was a one-run game. They had to face him. And credit to John Brebbia, who does get credited with the loss, I believe. Yes, because he came into the game when Steven Wilson put the tying run on base. So the loss does go to John Brebbia. John Brebbia did not make a bad pitch. That was a slider down in the zone. But when you're a generational talent, when you are a superstar, a potential MVP, those pitches can be hit out. And I've asked this to a couple of my coworkers and to random Royals fans at times of when Bobby Witt Jr. got off to this hot stretch in the second half. How do you throw to him? If he's spitting on pitches out of the zone now, how do you throw to him? What do you get him to chase? Where are his cold zones? There's really not any when he can hit a pitch like that out of the park. I understand. The Royals shouldn't have been in a spot like that against the White Sox. Down 5-2. Alec Marsh was not great. The bullpen was equally as bad, if not worse. Angel Serpa, not good tonight. Chris Stratton, not good tonight. But Will Smith and James MacArthur, I tip my cap. I'll show you the appreciation you deserve for keeping that game where it was. But the White Sox are a bad team. Still, in a inning like that, with the pressure that you have, with the at-bats with 2 outs, to get it to your superstar, that's what can make this team special. That's what makes Bobby special. Where so many years, if you were a Royals fan long enough, there were moments just like that where the Royals were the reverse in that. They were the team on the bump. The inning was slipping away from them, and they had to face a generational talent on some other team. They had to face Alex Rodriguez. They had to face David Ortiz. They had to face Mike Trout. Even last year, Julio Rodriguez and the series he had against Kansas City, it felt like every big at-bat got to him, and the Royals had to pitch to him, and he always gave them the lead. Now, I'm not going to put Julio in the category of those future Hall of Famers just yet, but I can only imagine the White Sox fans in attendance or in the broadcast booth or sitting at home, though it's been a dismal season for them. When Bobby Witt Jr. walked to the plate, there was no way in hell anybody thought, well, they'll probably get him out here. Maybe not even probably. I think they believed at that point the percentage of getting Bobby Witt Jr. out in an inning that had unraveled like that at maybe 10%. That the only way you could get him out is if he smoked one at somebody, where they didn't have to move. Because at times, that's how Bobby Witt Jr. has gotten out a lot, of just scalding the ball to somewhere where there's a guy, there's a glove. And I haven't experienced that too many times with a baseball player in general. Like, I don't think we can label superstar to every great player on a team. Like, there's a difference between even an all-star and an MVP, a generational talent. What Bobby Witt Jr. is doing this season, what is doing in the month of July, is mind-boggling. It's video game-esque. It doesn't make sense. And the fact it's coming in year 1 of this long contract, you think about how many times in sports, for that matter, a superstar gets a deal like this and doesn't really live up to it. The pressure you have year 1 to perform when you get $300 million, there's a lot of it. And when I asked Bobby about that all the way back at Royals Rally in February, he said he loved the pressure. He wants it to be on him. And here he is leading the league in average. He's on pace for bonkers numbers. I mean, numbers you wouldn't ever dream of for even a first-round pick, a number 2 pick. Like, I believe at this point, Bobby Witt Jr. has exceeded the expectations that were set for him when he was drafted. This comes from Nick Capel, or Nick Capel, excuse me, on Twitter. You can go follow him at Nick Capel. The NickKappel does a great job putting out Royal stats on there. Very, very great guy down to talk to in the clubhouse every time I'm out there, and brings up great information just like this that we can utilize when talking on this podcast. Bobby Witt Jr. is now on pace for 131 runs, 224 hits, 89 extra base hits, 113 RBIs, 34 stolen bases, and no player in Major League history has finished a season with those totals. That's the type of player they have here in Bobby Witt Jr. And what's even funnier, because of where he was at the All-Star break and where Gunnar Henderson was, Bobby Witt Jr. could have the best single season in Royals history, and you'd look back and go, he didn't even start the All-Star game. Or he may not even win MVP if they go with Aaron Judge. But still, at this point, all I'm focused on is that Bobby Witt Jr. is here in Kansas City for the foreseeable future. He didn't just have the go-ahead grand slam. He had 4 hits in the game. He made 2 tremendous plays in the 9th inning that completely diminished any chance of the White Sox coming back. It was like a one-man show. And I can imagine those that were there in attendance were just looking around and going, what else can he do? Or what can't he do is the better question there. He is a phenomenal baseball player. He is a baseball player that Kansas City has not seen since George Brett. And I think even George Brett would tell you that Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be better than him. That whenever he's done playing baseball, he's going to have better seasons. he's going to have not one, but multiple MVPs. Because I am a firm believer of when you are judging an MVP award, if you take that player off that team, what does that team look like? I'm not sure the Royals are even within 10 games of 500 if they don't have Bobby Witt Jr. And that's not to diminish what Aaron Judge has done. I think he has a very good chance. And if I wasn't being biased and wanted to be Bobby Witt Jr., I sure as hell would pick Aaron Judge. But the Yankees have 2 MVP guys on their team, and Juan Soto and Aaron Judge. Like, to me, when it comes down to it and what he's pacing for, I think he's got a really good shot after what he's done here in the second half. Yeah, you can fight back with, he's facing the White Sox, but he did a lot of the same stuff against the Diamondbacks and the Cubs. I mean, nobody can get him out right now. His on-base percentage is over 500 in the month of July, and he's hitting 346. He's leading the league in average by nearly 10 points. He was hitting 320-something to kick off the second half. That's how good he's been in these, 10 games? Was it a 9-game homestand? Yeah, so 10 games into the second half. It's been bonkers. Generational talent. Definitely charging for the MVP award now. Aaron Judge was great tonight as well. I think it's a 2-guy race at this point in time. Can always change because Bobby was the 3rd or 4th betting favorite before we kicked off the second half. Now I'd imagine that the 2 front runners are going to be Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt Jr. We'll see how things will play out over the final 2 months of the season. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I'm going to talk about what I was planning to lead off with before Bobby Witt Jr. went nuclear again. Michael Lorenzen, the first trade deadline acquisition for the Royals, the second one they've made in the last handful of weeks. In fact, the second they've made in the month of July. What did we make of it, and why did the Royals make that move? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors today in Stitch Fix. And if you are one of those guys out there, or girls for that matter, that are wondering about, figuring out what to wear, you feel like your style's not the best, you're always trying to piece together an outfit, maybe you've been made fun of for the style that you have, or maybe you don't care enough and you're wanting to upgrade on what you may be looking like. Well, Stitch Fix can have you covered by a stylist picking out your wardrobe and what would work best for you. It's one of my favorite sponsors here on the show. They do such a great job. And I'm not somebody who I would consider to be stylish. You've seen a lot of my outfits before, at least the top half if you watch on YouTube. I wear a hat sometimes I don't, and I wear a t-shirt. But Stitch Fix, they can really get creative with it because all you got to do is give your stylist your style, size, and budget preference, and you can order the boxes when you want and how you want with no subscription required. Style that makes you feel good as you look. Get started at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $20 off on your first fix. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $20 off. stitchfix.com/MLB. You must redeem within 7 days of sign up, and the offer does not include kids fixes. As I mentioned numerous times now in this episode, I was not planning to talk about Bobby Witt Jr. in the first segment. This was going to be a segment in which I basically just broke down the Michael Lorenzen deal. It was one that came out of nowhere. I woke up this morning, was kind of just keeping an eye on Twitter, was watching MLB Network to see if anything was breaking. And then right as I'm about to go to work, you get the news of the Royals are interested in Michael Lorenzen. And then 5 minutes later, Michael Lorenzen goes to the Royals in exchange for Walter Pennington. And, Michael Lorenzen is somebody that I don't think is an eye popper. The numbers are okay. I'm not going to gush about them. I'm not going to gush about the advanced data because the reality is, Michael Lorenzen hasn't been very good now for 8 or 9 starts. But it did fill a need that the Royals have that maybe a lot of us weren't paying close enough attention to. Like, I think in the back of everybody's mind, it made sense to make a trade like this, but it wasn't at the forefront. When you were thinking about trade deadline acquisitions, be honest, you were thinking about Jazz Chisholm. You were thinking about Michael Kopech. You were thinking about Tanner Scott. You were thinking about maybe Tommy Pham. Maybe you were thinking about Taylor Ward, Luis Rengifo, Luis Garcia. You weren't thinking about a starter because in reality, because I'll out myself here, I wasn't completely familiar with who all was available out there on the starting pitching market because you weren't hearing much outside of Eric Fedde in Chicago, Garrett Crochet, Tarek Skubal, Jack Flaherty. Like all of those guys were getting the most buzz and we were hearing the most about it. But you weren't hearing about the reasonably priced ones, the guys that the Royals could afford. Because I think for those that listen here, you care about who the Royals can afford, not about what the Orioles can afford with the Tigers or what the Yankees can afford, what the Phillies can afford. Your mind was elsewhere. You weren't thinking about starting pitching. Maybe you were. I don't want to speak for everybody listening to this podcast. But for me, I wasn't really identifying a lot of starting pitchers on the market. But the Royals, as JJ Picollo brought up this morning, have been very vocal in internal discussions about the inning workload that a lot of these guys have had in the rotation. Cole Riggins has already shattered his career high in innings for a single season. Seth Lugo is, I think, under 30 innings away now from his career high, and he's got 11 or 12 starts left in the tank. Michael Wacha is a guy that hasn't thrown near 160, 170 innings in quite some time. Last year, he didn't have a super high total, and he just surpassed 100 innings in his last start, which came against Arizona. Brady Singer is a guy that has had a pretty big workload. Alec Marsh has never done this for a full season. So Michael Lorenzen comes in, and he gives you that depth. And I don't know when Alec Marsh's turn in the rotation comes up on Saturday in Detroit, if they'll go with Marsh again or they'll go with Lorenzen, or if Lorenzen goes to the bullpen. McEntire said pregame today, they're not really sure what Lorenzen's role is going to be. And that once he gets here, which should be Wednesday or Thursday, they'll have a better idea of it. To me, though, it makes a lot of sense why they did this. And I think they were very fortunate that all they had to give up was Walter Pennington. I understand a lot of people like Walter Pennington. I liked Walter Pennington. But Walter Pennington was also a 26-year-old 4A guy that had gotten 2 outs at the big league level, who, yes, had good numbers in AAA, but it's AAA. We've seen this with Drew Waters and CJ Alexander. Yes, hitters, but even Jonathan Bowen had really good numbers this year, had 1 start up in Kansas City. It didn't go well because we know how big of a jump AAA is to the big league level. And I don't think the Royals ever viewed Walter Pennington as the fix to the bullpen. He had good strikeout numbers, didn't walk a lot of people, had a low whip. Again, I think a very successful minor league 4A guy who could be a good big league reliever. But the Royals knew they needed starting pitching more, and what they could get for value right there. The Royals didn't have to give up a top 30. And with Walter Pennington being a 26-year-old minor league guy who you probably didn't hear a lot about before spring training, maybe you keep really good tabs like a good buddy Preston Farr, Royals minors over there. The guys over at KC Sports Network, they've got tabs on a lot of the Royals minor league guys, Alex Duvall being another one. If you're locked into that, you would probably know who Walter Pennington was. If you didn't really know a lot about the minor league system, he probably wasn't on your radar. And I think the Royals look at him, who was unsigned out of the Colorado School of the Mines. I actually know a few people who went to that school. But he's a 26-year-old. He was undrafted. If you can't feel confident that you can develop another one of Walter Pennington's or someone like him, then I don't know what to tell you about your pitching department. Like, I think Walter Pennington has talent, but when you have an undrafted guy from a small school and make it all the way up to the big leagues as a 26-year-old, that says a lot about your pitching development. And that's why I think the Royals included him in that deal. They needed starting pitching. They needed that swing man, that 6th guy they could go to on the off chance there was an injury, or to give a lot of relief to the guys who've had a big workload. And you only had to give one guy who's not even one of your top 30 prospects. So you still have ammo to make more moves, which we'll talk about in our final segment today. And you get good starting pitching depth. Michael Lorenzen is not phenomenal, but he was a trade deadline acquisition last year for the Philadelphia Phillies. He was an all-star last year with Detroit. He threw a no-hitter in his first home start for the Phillies. All things considered, this year, in 18 starts or so, he's got a 3.81 ERA. Yeah, he doesn't have great strikeout numbers. He's walking maybe a little bit too much. But I answer it with this simple point here. If the Royals had somebody go down to injury, or they wanted to make a move for somebody else, right? They wanted to bump Marsh out of the rotation. The next man up is Daniel Lynch. And if not Daniel Lynch, it's Anthony Veneziano. They just moved Jonathan Bowen back to the bullpen in Omaha, so it wouldn't be him. Andrew Hoffman's another starter in Omaha, but not great numbers, and he's not in the 40-man. So you'd have to make a move there. This gives the Royals a very simple solution. On the off chance they move Marsh out of that spot, somebody goes down, it's Michael Lorenzen. That is going to be the starter. And that, to me, is an upgrade over the guys they had. And you gave up Walter Pennington. I know it stings. He could be a good reliever, but the Royals felt like they needed a little extra length in their starting rotation, one that's been very good this year, but that's their best aspect. If that runs out of gas, if those guys who haven't thrown that many innings before start sliding back in September, well, there's going to be your blown opportunity. Michael Lorenzen may be good. He may not be good, but I think he's an upgrade over what they had in Omaha. If they wanted to move on from Marsh and move him to the bullpen, or somebody did get banged up and they wanted to replace him with somebody who is a proven starter and pitched in the postseason at this level. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll talk about some potential trades that could happen tomorrow and also some that just broke while I was doing this podcast. But before we do that, a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring in the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, what can we expect tomorrow with the trade deadline approaching? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. One last shout out to our final sponsor and our title sponsor in SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get you a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. The trade deadline is tomorrow, and I think this segment's going to have a little bit more juice to it considering the Royals just won and where my comment section on Twitter was about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. There has been this limbo, I think, of what the Royals should do. I have been of the opinion that the Royals are going to be buying within reason, and they've known that now for quite some time. They were not going to be selling. J.J. Bacole has been vocal since the offseason, for that matter, about if they had a chance in the second half, late in the second half, and they could make moves to better this team, they were going to do so. And John Sherman kind of shared that sentiment, that they want to reward the guys with a very strong first half. And even though they've dipped a little bit, and yes, it could have been a disaster tonight of losing to the White Sox, they didn't. And they're 9 games over 500. They hold a wild card spot by 1 game. They gained 1 on Minnesota tonight, and they are 6.5 games back of first place. There is reason to give your team a chance. And I understand that there are people out there cautious of let's build for 2025. Let's go for guys with club control. And I do believe that the Royals should be targeting guys with club control. So you're bettering this team now, and you're bettering them for next year so that this isn't a flash in the pan. It is not a just miracle season, basically. Like, you are going to see this team grow each and every single season. But I do think you have to look at next year and be realistic. Is Seth Lugo going to give you what he's given you this year? Is Michael Wacha? Is Bobby Witt Jr., as good as he is, going to have an MVP season? Is Salvador Perez going to turn back the clock? Are guys like Hunter Renfroe going to give you value? Kyle Isbell giving you value? Vinny Pasquantino giving you value? All those things are something you should try to bank on. But when you have opportunities like this and you are a small market team, I don't think there is any harm in try to thread the needle a little bit with some of these deals. I think Michael Lorenzen is trying to thread the needle. He's a rental, but you gave up a 26-year-old reliever, not even in your top 30. Tomorrow, or tonight for that matter, there was breaking news as I was doing this podcast, Jorge Soler going from the Giants back to the Braves, where he helped them win a World Series in 2021. Like, the stove has been incredibly hot of late. And I do expect the Royals to make a move or two tomorrow. I think I have a team in mind of who they're going to try to target. Yes, I think Tanner Scott would be phenomenal. And the Royals are a finalist. and going after Tanner Scott. They were listed today as a finalist with the Red Sox, Orioles, and Yankees, if I can remember correctly. That was by Jim Bowden, I believe. But it's going to cost a lot to get Tanner Scott, and Tanner Scott's a rental. I believe the team that they have zeroed in on is the Los Angeles Angels. Because even though the Angels have unloaded their big fish, Carlos Estevez, there are 3 guys on that team that I believe the Royals have tried to be aggressive with. J.J. McCall also said today that they had called the White Sox asking about certain guys. They had told them which guys were off the table, and J.J. McCall said the ball's in their court. And then we saw Tommy Pham, we saw Eric Fetty, and Michael Kopech go to different teams in a 3-team trade with the Dodgers and the Cardinals. So now that rules out the White Sox. The only organization that has been consistently linked to the Royals is the Angels, and that would be with Luis Rengifo, a potential leadoff hitter who's hitting over 300, Taylor Ward, who has some very good underlying data, though not the best overall numbers. He could be another leadoff candidate, and then Luis Garcia, a 37-year-old reliever, journeyman, 13 years in the big leagues, but still runs it up to 95 to 96 with a little bit of good swing and miss stuff. Like, to me, if I was to just make a selection now, if I was to make a prediction right now, I think the Royals go after one of those guys with the Angels. And yes, it could be 2 moves, but it also comes down to what they would have to give up. And both Rengifo and Taylor Ward have years of control. Luis Garcia is a rental, so that makes me think because Lorenzen was a rental deal, they may or may not go after Luis Garcia because those are 2 rental guys. But I do feel like they're going to make a strong play for Rengifo and they're going to make a strong play for Taylor Ward. And those would be the solutions, in my opinion, to the leadoff spot. I think it would be the easiest plug and play that they've had all season long because they've let off guys like Garcia, Garrett Hampson, Adam Frazier, Michael Massey. That would be your easy solution. Taylor Ward or Luis Rengifo. There are also going to be guys that I'm not even talking about. Michael Lorenzen was nowhere near on my radar until that deal happened. But I do remember, and I said this last week, that on A New Day with SSJ over at 810 WHB with Steven St. John, he had Buster Olney on the show, and he said there was a strong belief among other teams in the league that the Royals were going to get the guys they were targeting. That makes a lot of sense now with Michael Lorenzen because I'm not sure how many teams were interested in Michael Lorenzen. The Royals got their target. I'm sure Lorenzen was on their radar for quite some time. There could be another move like that tomorrow where it happens and you go, I didn't even know there was smoke around it. You know, I'm a big believer in where there's smoke, there's a fire. I said that when the Royals signed Seth Lugo. I've been consistent in saying that about the guys they've been linked to at the trade deadline. I feel like there's been too much smoke around the Royals and the Angels for a deal not to happen. I could always be wrong, right? I am not sitting here and telling you with 100% certainty that a Royals and Angels trade will happen tomorrow. But with how many times they've been linked to their players and how many the number is, 3 guys over there they're interested in. And the Angels haven't been super aggressive just yet. They did make that trade with Carlos Estevez, but they also have 3 guys they're planning to move tomorrow or planning to move late tonight. And I'll try to be my best at staying on top of it. So we'll have to see if the Royals can stay aggressive in that department. The trade deadlines tomorrow should be a very fun day. I'll have a lot of it covered over on my Twitter page at JohnnyJ_15. But as for us, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find us on wherever you get your podcast. That is Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. But one last reminder, and really not really a reminder, just thanking you, the listeners, for tuning in to Locked On Royals and making it your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Our host, Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to have a full breakdown of the trade deadline, the moves the Royals did or didn't make, and lead you into tomorrow's game against the Chicago White Sox. Game 2 of that series with Michael Wacha on the bump. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.